I want to go to Ben Johnson, senior reporter and editor here at the Washington Stand, with some top headline news. One of the big issues, Planned Parenthood and their annual report. Ben, welcome back to Washington Watch. Give us an update on some of the top news items today.
Right. In the Planned Parenthood report for the 2021-2022 year, they revealed that they committed 374,155 abortions last year, and they received $670.4 billion, $674.4 million in U.S. taxpayer funding. That's more than 1,000 babies aborted every single day, the second highest number of abortions the organization has ever committed. And it's worth pointing out, though, that that's 9,305 abortions fewer than they committed last year. So that's something worth celebrating. The report also shows that the heavily abortion-focused group moved significantly into providing transgender cross-hormone injections over the last year. 41 of the 49 affiliates of Planned Parenthood currently offer those services to those who are involved and suffer from gender dysphoria. They also bragged about creating something called Tone, which they describe as 2 volumes of self-care playlists for Black women, Latinas, and non-binary folks with tracks of affirmations and meditations for those who are suffering from gender dysphoria. The total amount of federal funding that they received during this full report, which is the first one to fully reflect the amount of funding provided by the Biden administration, shows that there was an increase of about $37 million this year over last year. That's about almost a 6% increase, even though they had fewer abortions, which is, of course, the big moneymaker.
So Ben, that increase in funding primarily coming from the federal level?
That's right. The federal level, as far as we're able to tell, it's lumped all together, but it's certainly reflective of the Biden administration and its new policies, which, again, this is the first report to fully reflect the fact that this is coming from the Biden administration. Between 2021 and 2022, all other kinds of actual health care, prenatal services, caring for those who suffer from miscarriages or pregnancy tests were all down. Contraceptive care and other forms of federally funded provisions were in fact increased.
So Ben Johnson, when you look at the overall budget of Planned Parenthood, it's a nonprofit, but oftentimes they show a profit. What did they take in this year that is above and beyond their expenses? Was that reported?
It was almost $205 million, $204.7 million to be specific, of what is known as excess revenue above and beyond their expenses. So that gives them total assets of well over $2.7 billion. And this is a massive increase for those who've been following it for some time. In 1990, they were bragging that they had just broken the $100 million aspect. Even with Bidenflation, this is a significant increase, which we've seen year on year.
I have to tell you, Ben, that's a little troubling when you look at an organization like this sitting on $2 billion. And now we're actually seeing them closing clinics, and they're moving more to the abortion pill, which we know now, last numbers that we have that are pretty accurate, 54% of abortions performed through the abortion drug. So there's very little overhead with that. What are they going to do with $2 billion?
Well, you can increase your funding for salaries and so on. You can hire more people, but then also that can be used for funding so-called charitable activities. But a lot of that, as we know, involves either sexual education, which they brag about increasing over the past year, or about it can be used in some increments in order to lobby the federal government and other politicians.
Wait a minute. Let's stop you on that for just a second here. So this is an issue we've raised before, that this is an entity that is getting federal funding, and that's one of the things they lobby for. So they can actually churn this money and use it in such a way, either offset their lobbying costs by paying with the federal dollars something else, their overhead, which frees up money for them to lobby. So essentially, they're taking tax dollars that they're getting from hardworking Americans who are opposed to their agenda, and they're using that to get more tax dollars.
It's a circular cash flow, essentially. Planned Parenthood takes some of the money that it has from previous year's excess revenue. They give it to politicians, almost 100% associated with the Democratic Party and the Biden administration. And then the Biden administration increases how much taxpayer funding goes back to them. So it's a circular cash flow with taxpayer funding, even though most Americans are against taxpayer-funded abortions. 70% overseas, and something about like 58% of Americans in the most recent survey say they oppose taxpayer-funded abortion at home, and yet they have no choice. Their funds are being compelled to be used to violate their conscience.
So this would be, in my view, Ben Johnson, another example of elections have consequences, where you see, even in a time where we're talking about we don't have money for this, we don't have money for that, the president says we can't cut the budget, that Planned Parenthood is getting more money from taxpayers.
It is, and again, even though the services that are being provided are shrinking in many cases, actual healthcare services. Also, there's an interesting tidbit in this, which talks about the way that elections are important. They have consequences, which is, of course, the Dobbs decision. The report says that this is the worst thing that's ever happened to them. They call the decision heartbreaking. But as we said, there were 9,300 fewer abortions this year. One of the things that's been left out of a lot of the reporting, even on the pro-life side, is their fiscal year runs through June 30th of last year. The Dobbs decision came down on June 24th. So clearly not all of that has to do with the actual decision itself and the pro-life laws which followed in the wake of that wonderful decision. But it tells us that even the threat of a national pro-life movement and something that will restrict abortion, that will allow greater protection for the unborn, is enough to reduce the number of abortions that are committed every year by a significant level.
All right, Ben Johnson, thanks so much for that report. Always good to see you.
Thank you.